My name is Margaret Whitmore, and at 74 years old, I never imagined my life would shrink to a single suitcase and a narrow bed in a place that smelled of bleach and boiled carrots. But that was the reality on the February afternoon my children drove me to Green Valley residence and left me there as though I were an obligation finally checked off their list. Linda, my eldest, kept her lawyer's voice even and professional as she handed me a glossy brochure. "It's safer here, Mom. You'll thank us later." She didn't meet my eyes. David mumbled about how his construction business kept him too busy to drive across town. Caroline smoothed her hair in the reflection of the glass door, promising she'd visit all the time. None of them stayed long enough to share a cup of tea, let alone help me unpack. I stood at the lobby window and watched their cars peel away 3 sets of taillights vanishing into the winter dusk. They didn't glance back. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not just from grief, but from the unmistakable taste of betrayal. The room they gave me was small, its window facing a parking lot rather than a garden. I sat on the bed clutching my handbag as though it might hold the life I'd lost. For 10 minutes, I allowed the tears to fall, 10 minutes for the house I'd tended, for 4 decades, 10 minutes for the trust I thought unshakable. 10 minutes for the family dinners and birthdays that would never return. Then I remembered the letter in my purse, written in my sister Catherine's shaky hand before she passed. She had left me her entire estate, nearly $8 million, along with a warning, "Don't let them diminish you. Demand respect." They thought they had caged me. What they didn't know was that I now held the keys. A week before that February afternoon, my house on Maple Street was still mine. The sun poured through lace curtains, catching dust motes that danced above the quilt I'd folded across the armchair. I was polishing the frame of an old family photo when the crunch of tires on frozen gravel made me pause. Linda's sedan pulled up first, spotless and silver. She climbed out, briskly, files tucked under her arm as if she were heading to court. David arrived in his truck, slamming the door with a force that rattled the porch rail. Caroline followed in her small SUV heels, clicking too sharply against the walkway. It had been years since they arrived together without it being a holiday. My chest fluttered with hope, an instinct I should have ignored. "Mom, we need to talk," Linda said the moment she stepped inside. She didn't take off her coat, just walked straight into the living room as though it were her office. David leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed. Caroline sank onto the sofa, scrolling her phone before remembering to look up with a forced smile. They spoke of my age of safety, of what might happen if I fell. Linda opened a folder and slid across a brochure. Green Valley residents, all cheerful fonts and staged photographs of smiling seniors playing cards. "It's close to me," she explained. "Modern. Secure." I glanced around the room, the piano my husband had played every Christmas, the shelves of books I had read aloud when they were children, the quilt stitched with my own hands. "And what about this house?" I asked quietly. "That's the good part," Caroline replied quickly. "The market's hot. We can sell it fast and the money will cover everything." In that moment, I saw it clearly. They weren't visiting me. They were negotiating my exit. The following Saturday, my house no longer felt like home. Movers stomped across the hardwood floors with careless boots rolling out tape that screeched as it sealed away fragments of my life. David had hired them, insisting on efficiency. Linda hovered with her clipboard, directing what stayed and what went. Caroline flitted from room to room, tapping photos on her phone, as if documenting evidence, not memories. They told me I could bring 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. 74 years of living reduced to what could fit into the trunk of a car. My quilts, the china set from my wedding. The piano that had filled the house with carols, none of it was coming. I tried to speak, but Linda cut me off with her lawyer's finality. "Mom, it's better this way. Less clutter. Clutter." That was what they called my life. When the last box disappeared through the door, I stood in the empty living room. The walls seemed to hum with echoes, children's laughter at birthdays, the slam of doors during teenage fights, the creak of the floorboards when my husband returned late from work. I pressed my hand against the doorframe one last time, as though I could absorb the memories into my skin. "Come on, Mom," David said, jingling his keys. "We've got to get you settled." I followed them out to Linda's sedan. From the back seat, I watched my brick house shrink in the rearview mirror until it was nothing but a speck swallowed by distance. They chatted about traffic and schedules, but their words blurred. All I could think was how easily they had dismantled my life, boxed it up, and traded it for convenience. By the time we pulled into Green Valley's lot, I felt like an artifact being placed in storage. The moment I stepped through Green Valley's doors, a wave of disinfectant and boiled cabbage wrapped around me. The walls were painted a yellow that someone must have called cheerful, but to me it looked like old bruises. A nurse with kind eyes led me to a narrow room at the end of a corridor. The window overlooked a parking lot, gray asphalt where my garden once bloomed. Linda set my suitcases on the bed, already reaching for her phone. David muttered about needing to get back to work. Caroline placed a bouquet on the dresser without removing the plastic wrap. "You'll be fine, Mom," she whispered, then slipped out the door with the others. I stood at the window and watched their cars disappear down the street. Not once did they turn around. The silence that followed was louder than any goodbye. I sat on the stiff mattress, clutching my handbag like an anchor. For 10 minutes, I let the tears come, hot, aching tears for the house I had lost, the trust betrayed, the years of sacrifice forgotten. When the sobs subsided, I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the envelope Catherine had given me before she passed. Her handwriting wavered across the page. "Margaret, you've spent your life giving. Don't let them diminish you. You have the means now. Use it. Demand respect." I read her words again and again until they carved themselves into me. The fear that had clenched my chest loosened, replaced by something sharper. That night, lying in the narrow bed, I made a promise. I would not fade into this place like another forgotten soul. Green Valley might have been chosen as my cage, but I would turn it into my stage. Within a week, I learned the rhythms of Green Valley. Breakfast trays clattered down the hall at 7 bingo, at 10 soup. At noon, lights out before 8. The routine was meant to comfort, but it felt like slow erosion each day, identical to the last. I began to notice what most visitors never saw. Margaret, from across the hall, sat by the window every Sunday waiting for daughters who never came. Harold, a retired postman, still dressed in his best sweater every weekend, hoping his son would appear. 6 months had passed since he last did. The stories weren't exceptions. They were the rule. The staff carried their own burdens. Maria, a nurse's aide, confided that she worked double shifts to afford rent. Robert, another aide, studied for his nursing license at night, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They cared, but care alone couldn't fill the gaps left by understaffing and neglect. One afternoon, while pretending to examine the activity schedule, I overheard 2 administrators whispering near the office. Words like loan default, overextended, and possible bankruptcy slipped into the hall. I froze, heart thudding. The institution that held me captive was crumbling from the inside. That night, lying in my bed, I pulled Catherine's letter from the drawer. Her words glared back at me. "Use it. Demand respect." For the first time since arriving, I saw the shape of a plan. I still had nearly $8 million sitting untouched in the bank. What if I used it not simply to protect myself, but to transform this place entirely? The thought lit something in me. Grief shifted to calculation. If my children thought Green Valley was the end of me, they were about to discover it was only the beginning. On Thursday morning, I told the nurse at the desk I had a medical appointment. Instead, I boarded the bus downtown with Catherine's letter tucked inside my purse. The cold air stung my cheeks, but my mind burned with purpose. I walked into the offices of Morton & Hale, a law firm I had researched carefully from the public computer in the lounge. The receptionist guided me to a conference room where James Hale himself appeared mid-40s, sharp suit eyes steady. "I'd like to purchase a business," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He lifted a brow. "What kind of business, Mrs. Whitmore, Green Valley residence? And any facilities tied to Silvercare Holdings?" He studied me, surprised, but curious. "May I ask why?" "Because I live there," I answered. "And I know better than anyone that it's failing. But I also know what it could become." For hours, we pored over financials. Silvercare had stretched itself too thin, mortgaging future growth that never arrived. Debt weighed heavy. Bankruptcy loomed. James leaned back at last. With a cash offer they'd sell in weeks. Then prepare the offer, I said, and my name stays hidden until everything is signed. He nodded. We'll form a trust to shield your identity. It can all be done quietly. When I left the office, twilight had fallen, the streets glittering with ice. My steps felt lighter than they had in months. They thought they had locked me away. What they had done instead was hand me the perfect vantage point. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed, I stopped seeing peeling paint and flickering lights. I saw a chessboard, and for once I held the queen. The papers were signed on a gray Tuesday evening. By midnight, I was no longer just a resident. I was the owner of Green Valley and 2 sister facilities. Sleep evaded me. Instead, I paced my small room, rehearsing the words I would say in the morning. At 9 o'clock, I walked down the corridor in my navy dress, the one I had saved from Caroline's wedding. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady as I entered the administrator's office. Nancy Rhodes looked up from a desk cluttered with unpaid bills. At 45, she already looked worn thin, the strain etching lines across her face. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked cautiously, "is something wrong?" "Yes," I said, closing the door. "Everything. But that's about to change." I laid the folder on her desk. "As of last night, I own Green Valley." She blinked, scanning the documents with trembling fingers. When her eyes found my signature, her mouth fell open. This is real. Very real. And the first order of business is raising pay. Your staff has been carrying this place on their backs for scraps. That ends now. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through fatigue. "There's another matter," I continued. "A new visiting policy. Families who come at least twice a week will have full access. Those who don't will be restricted to Sunday afternoons 2 to 4. No exceptions." Nancy hesitated. "That will cause backlash." "Let it," I replied. "If outrage is what it takes to make families remember their parents, then outrage is a tool." She studied me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Let's begin." The letters went out on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, my door slammed open with such force the hinges rattled. Linda stormed in first, waving the notice like a summons. "Mother, what is this?" she demanded. I looked up from the crossword puzzle on my lap. "Hello, Linda. It's nice to see you, too." "Don't play coy," she snapped. "Restricted visiting hours." "Who authorized this?" David followed. Face flushed from the cold and from anger. "This is about us, isn't it?" "Because we haven't been here enough. Caroline slipped in last her phone already in hand. I'm calling an attorney. They can't tell us when we're allowed to see our own mother." I set my pen down and rose slowly, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. "Tell me," I asked evenly, "when was the last time the 3 of you sat together in this room?" They exchanged quick glances, fumbling for an answer. None came. "I'll remind you," I continued. "It was the day you left me here nearly 2 months ago." "Mom, that's not fair," David muttered. "We've been busy." I repeated the word, bitter in my mouth. Too busy to share a cup of tea with me. Too busy to remember that I am still alive. But suddenly you have time when your convenience is threatened. Caroline flushed scarlet. Linda's jaw tightened. David stared at the floor. "You call it harassment," I said. "I call it accountability. If you love me, prove it. Not with promises, but with presence." For once, no one argued. The silence in that small room was thicker than any speech, and in that silence, the balance of power shifted for the first time. By the end of the week, I heard whispers in the hall. Linda had hired a private investigator. It didn't surprise me she had always needed facts to wield like weapons. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth found its way back to my door. On Friday afternoon, all 3 arrived together. Linda carried a folder thick with documents, her mouth set in a hard line. David trailed behind, uneasy. while Caroline clutched her phone like a shield. Linda dropped the folder onto my dresser. "We know," she said flatly. "Cash transactions, shell companies, transfers tied to Green Valley and 2 other facilities. Tell me it isn't you." Caroline's voice wavered. "Please, Mom. Just say this is some mistake." I stood slowly smoothing the edge of my cardigan, and if it were me, I asked. The room froze. David's voice cracked. "How could you even afford something like this?" "Catherine," I answered. "She left me her estate, nearly $8 million. Money you never asked about because you assumed I had nothing left to give." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. David dropped into a chair as though the air had been punched out of him. Linda's eyes narrowed. "You mean to tell us," she said, her voice sharp, "that you've been pulling the strings all along? Manipulating us?" "Not manipulating," I corrected. "Teaching. You treated me like a burden, so I created consequences. Love is proven by action, not by words, and I will no longer accept crumbs." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. In that instant, they realized the powerless woman they had abandoned now held all the keys. The moment my words settled, the room erupted. Linda's voice shot out first, sharp and furious. "This is outrageous, Mother. You've deceived us, hidden money, and turned it into a weapon." David's fists tightened at his sides. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look? We placed you here to keep you safe, not to profit from selling my home." I interrupted, my voice low but steady. Caroline burst into tears, mascara streaking her cheeks. "We didn't know, Mom. We thought we were helping." I took a step closer, meeting each of their eyes. "No, you didn't think at all. You assumed I was finished, a woman with no choices left. You never asked what I wanted. You never considered that I might still matter." Linda's chin trembled, though her words stayed sharp. "You're twisting this. You've turned into someone I don't recognize." "I've turned into the woman who remembers everything she gave you," I replied. "Do you recall the nights I sewed until dawn so you could have dresses for school plays? The double shifts I worked so David could finish college? The bonds I cashed so Caroline's wedding could shine the way she dreamed I gave until there was nothing left to give? And when I finally needed something back, just presence, just care, you chose convenience instead." David's shoulders slumped. Caroline sobbed harder, whispering apologies between breaths. Linda pressed her lips together, the lawyer's mask cracking as doubt seeped through. "You call this betrayal," I said quietly. "I call it truth. And truth has a way of demanding to be heard." The silence that followed was thick with shame, heavier than any accusation I could have spoken. The days that followed felt different, almost unsteady, like the ground shifting beneath my feet. For the first time since they left me here, my door began to hear tentative knocks. Caroline arrived first, carrying a bag from the bakery I loved. She looked younger without the practiced smile she wore at parties. "I thought you might like these," she murmured, setting the pastries on the dresser. Behind her, my granddaughter peeked in shyly. When the little girl climbed onto my lap with a picture book, something inside me softened, though the scar of betrayal remained. 2 days later, David appeared. He carried no gifts, only a folded newspaper. "Brought the crossword," he said awkwardly. Then he sat by the window and stayed asking questions about my day listening more than speaking. It was clumsy, but it was effort. For the first time in years, he seemed to notice me as more than an obligation. Linda was the last to come. She stood in the doorway with her briefcase, hesitating, as though unsure whether to enter. "I can't shut work off like a switch," she admitted, eyes weary, "but I'm trying." She sat stiffly, then slowly asked about old family stories she hadn't thought of in decades. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the little girl who once curled into my bed after nightmares. Each visit felt fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. I welcomed them, but trust could not be rebuilt overnight. Yet in their clumsy attempts and Caroline's laughter, David's listening, Linda's halting questions, I felt a warmth I thought long buried. Hope had returned, fragile, but real, Still, I kept it close-guarded, knowing it would take more than apologies to mend what was broken. 2 weeks later, the staff arranged a long table in the community room. It wasn't elegant plastic chairs, paper napkins, the faint smell of disinfectant still lingering, but it was ours. Caroline arrived first with her daughter, placing a small vase of flowers in the center. David carried a crock pot of chili, proud as he ladled bowls for residents who drifted by. Linda came last, hair slightly undone, her phone, silenced for once. As we sat together, the room filled with the clatter of spoons and the hum of voices. For years, our conversations had been clipped, burdened with obligation. That night, they felt almost human again. David raised his glass of iced tea. To Mom, he said quietly, for reminding us what matters. Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears. Linda reached across the table, her hand covering mine. The gesture was tentative but real. I smiled, though my words carried weight. This dinner doesn't erase the past. Trust isn't rebuilt in an evening. It takes showing up again and again, even when it's inconvenient. If you mean to change, prove it with time. They nodded, each in their own way. For once there was no debate, no defensiveness, only acknowledgement. When the meal ended and residents drifted back to their rooms, I lingered at the table. The future was uncertain, but the cracks in our family had stopped widening. We were at last facing them together. In that modest dining room, I understood something I had always known, but nearly forgotten. Love is measured not in words or gifts, but in presence. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe my children might finally learn it too.